During the Vietnam War, John McCain joined almost 600 other Americans who became prisoners of war in the notorious Hanoi Hilton. McCain sustained severe permanent injuries as a result and spent over 5 years in captivity. But after he entered politics, the knives came out, mostly from Democrats, but also from some Republicans. Accusations later arose accusing John McCain of committing treason while a prisoner of war, and other allegations of misconduct while in political office. Much of this resurfaced after his death from brain cancer in 2018, but what is true and what is false? Even on our video on Hanoi Jane Fonda, we continue to get comments asking how can we call Jane Fonda a traitor and not John McCain? Who was John McCain III? What did he endure as a POW? How and when did his captivity and service come into question? Let's find out. Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. John Sidney McCain III was born August 29, 1936, in the Naval Air Station in Cocosolo, Panama Canal Zone. His father was Admiral John Sidney McCain Jr., and his grandfather was also an admiral. John McCain III, despite not being a stellar student, graduated from the United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, in 1958, ranking 894 of 899 midshipmen, and received his officer's commission in the United States Navy, where he became a naval aviator. During Vietnam, he flew ground attack missions in A-4 Skyhawks from the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal, where he almost died in the fire aboard the ship in 1967 that destroyed over 20 aircraft, severely damaged the ship, killed 134 sailors, and injured 161 others. The actual cause was an electrical wiring malfunction on one of the Zuni rockets mounted on the F-4 Phantom behind him, but in later years McCain was blamed for the incident. While on a bombing mission during Operation Rolling Thunder over Hanoi on October 26, 1967, his A-4 was hit by a surface-to-air missile and he ejected, breaking both arms and his right leg in the process. In his own words, "I was on my 23rd mission, flying right over the heart of Hanoi in a dive at about 4,500 feet, when a Russian missile the size of a telephone pole came up. The sky was full of them, and blew the right wing off my Skyhawk dive bomber. It went into an inverted, almost straight-down spin. Unconscious due to the G-forces of the ejection, he landed in a lake where he was recovered. Then he was dragged out, stripped of his flight gear, beaten, kicked, and bayoneted in the foot." Again, as McCain stated, "About this time a guy came up and started yelling at the crowd to leave me alone. A woman came over and propped me up and held a cup of tea to my lips, and some photographers took some pictures. This quieted the crowd down quite a bit. Pretty soon they put me on a stretcher, lifted it onto a truck, and took me to Hanoi's main prison. I was taken into a cell and put on the floor. I was still on the stretcher, dressed only in my skivvies, with a blanket over me." McCain's torment did not end there. After arriving at the Hanoi Hilton, he, like the others captured before him, was tortured, starved, and beaten to the brink of suicidal ideation. According to McCain, "That's when I was hit with all sorts of war criminal charges. This started on the first day. I refused to give them anything except my rank, name, serial number, and date of birth. They beat me around a little bit. I was in such bad shape that when they hit me, it would knock me unconscious. They kept saying, 'You will not receive any medical treatment until you talk.' They wanted military rather than political information this time. Every time they asked me something, I'd just give my name, rank, and serial number and date of birth. Then the torture got worse. McCain had his arm badly manipulated as the incompetent doctor tried to put the bones back in place, and he passed out several times. They then brought a camera crew in and filmed him in the full arm and chest cast. His North Vietnamese captors soon learned that he was the son of Admiral McCain, and they offered him early release. In a sense of irony, the following year, his father, Admiral John S. McCain Jr., was named commander of all U.S. forces in the Vietnam theater, and the North Vietnamese again offered McCain early release. The reason was that the communists wanted to appear merciful for propaganda purposes and also to show other POWs that elite prisoners were willing to be treated preferentially. They used McCain's capture for propaganda purposes anyway. Under torture for information, such as his ship, fellow pilots, and intelligence information, McCain named the American football team, the Green Bay Packers, players instead of the pilots in his squadron. The North Vietnamese believed him. While undergoing both torture and treatment, such as it was, McCain was interrogated by a man they called the Cat. McCain said, "The first thing he did was show me Colonel John Flynn's identification card." Now, General John Flynn. Then he was our senior officer. He was shot down the same day I was. The Cat said through an interpreter, as he was not speaking English at this time, said, "The French television man is coming." I said, "Well, I don't think I want to be filmed," whereupon he announced, "You need 2 operations. If you don't talk to him, then we will take off your chest cast and you won't get any operations." He said, "You will say that you're grateful to the Vietnamese people and that you're sorry for your crimes." I told him I wouldn't do that. I was in the hospital about 6 weeks, then was taken to a camp in Hanoi that we called the Plantation. This was in late December 1967. I was put in a cell with 2 other men, George Day and Norris Overley, both Air Force majors. I was on a stretcher, my leg was stiff, and I was still in a chest cast that I kept for about 2 months. I was down to about 100 pounds from my normal weight of 155. According to George E. Bud Day, he said, "None of us thought John would survive very long. He was in the worst shape of any of us. There was always the risk of infection, blood clots, a myriad of things that could kill a man with several breaks. He was lucky. We did what we could for him." Given the offer of release, McCain refused repatriation unless every man taken before him was also released. That was the code. Such early release was prohibited by the POW's interpretation of the Military Code of Conduct, which states clearly in Article 3, "I will accept neither parole nor special favors from the enemy." But also, under the Geneva Convention of 1949, severely wounded prisoners or those very ill can be repatriated back to their nation of origin. The standing order from the senior officers, as well as the then senior ranking officer, Captain Jeremiah Denton, was that the men first captured, such as Lieutenant J.G. Everett Alvarez, who was captured in 1964, would be the first released, but all enlisted men would be released before officers could leave, if that was offered, and McCain honored that code of conduct. McCain knew that if he took the offer, it would have devastated the morale of his fellow prisoners and handed a propaganda victory to the enemy. So he refused his opportunity for early release and spent the next 5 years in near constant suffering and the rest of his life as an American war hero. The Military Code of Conduct expects every POW to hold out to the best of their ability even while under torture and duress. It does not say that they have to be beaten to death. Most of the POWs were tortured and maltreated to extract confessions and sign propaganda statements. Nearly all of them eventually yielded something to their captors, but most of the information they gave was worthless regarding military value. One of the multiple forms of abuse was the Vietnamese rope trick. the POW's hands tied behind his back. His arms were rotated backward and upward in their sockets until the bones popped out of joint, while the guards simultaneously forced his neck forward. This often was accompanied by a beating. Only 2 POWs were actually labeled collaborators and are recommended for court-martial after their collective release, but McCain was not one of them, and he never gave critical information and received 2 to 3 beatings weekly because of his continued refusal to sign additional statements. Also, McCain refused to meet with various anti-war propaganda groups, especially Jane Fonda. See our video on her and some of the comments about McCain. This saw him get some more rough treatment. His captors then placed him in solitary confinement for the next 2 years. For punishment, McCain said, they would almost always take you to another room where you didn't have a mosquito net or a bed or any clothes. For the next 4 days, I was beaten every 2 to 3 hours by different guards. My left arm was broken again, and my ribs were cracked. McCain, like many others, was well aware of how far the beatings could go. When Ed Atterbury and John Dermisi were recaptured after an escape attempt and Atterbury was murdered, he died under the torture. But John Dermisi, who was in fact a hardcore POW like Stockdale, Day, and others, believed that McCain caved in too easily, but he stopped short of calling it treason. The one thing that kept the POWs going was discipline, adhering to the code of conduct, and following the chain of command. Navy Captain Jeremiah Denton, the SRO, or senior ranking officer, established a policy that no prisoners should see any delegations. As McCain himself stated, quote, "By the way, a very interesting thing. After I got back, Henry Kissinger told me that when he was in Hanoi to sign the final documents, the North Vietnamese offered him one man that he could take back to Washington with him, and that was me. He, of course, refused, and I thanked him very much for that, because I did not want to go out of order. Most guys were betting that I'd be the last guy out." McCain was repatriated with the rest of the Hilton prisoners and spent months in inpatient treatment having surgeries to repair his broken body, and he was not alone. Many of the prisoners had similar issues. In 1982, McCain was first elected to the United States House of Representatives, and after serving 2 terms, he then was elected to the United States Senate, serving 6 terms. He was later the Republican nominee for President of the United States in the 2008 election. Then there were the rumors from the usual anonymous sources that McCain had betrayed his fellow prisoners and gave sensitive information. James B. Stockdale, a retired admiral and Medal of Honor recipient because of his duty in the Hanoi Hilton, called it bullshit and said that, quote, McCain was solid as a rock. In typical fashion, on February 21, 2008, during the Republican Party presidential primaries, Democrats using the New York Times and the Washington Post both published articles, quote, detailing rumors of an improper relationship between John McCain and lobbyist Vicky Eisman. Of course, neither liberal newspaper provided any corroborating sources or even named individuals who supplied information, utilizing the ever-standard anonymous source as their methodology. In December 2008, Eisman filed a $27 million defamation lawsuit against the New York Times, alleging that the paper falsely communicated an illicit romantic relationship between her and McCain and used unnamed anonymous sources and innuendo. The case was settled in February 2009, and as a condition of the settlement, the New York Times printed an unusual note to readers, but not an apology, but a backtrack stating that the Times had not intended to allege any affair, which they clearly did, but without any evidence. McCain's fellow Senator Joe Lieberman, a Democrat, whom I also knew and considered a good man, was a Democrat turned independent who endorsed McCain for the presidency despite being in the opposite political party. And he said, "The story, I think, is outrageously unfair to him. There's no there there." McCain also chaired the Senate Commerce Committee from 1997 to 2001 and 2003 to 2005, where he opposed pork barrel spending and earmarks. He wanted accountability for every dollar spent. This cut deeply into the lobbying groups who catered to both political parties, and he wanted intense scrutiny on every spending measure of taxpayer dollars, which was another very unpopular position, even from his own party. He then made more enemies by supporting regulating the financing of political campaigns to keep campaigns clean, keeping a detailed accounting of all campaign contributions, which eventually resulted in the passage of the McCain-Feingold Act in 2002. His political enemies still tried to brand him a criminal. A 2017 article posted on Revenge of the Herd claimed, John McCain was pardoned for treason, alleging that during his time as a prisoner of war, McCain gave information to the North Vietnamese in exchange for better treatment, and that he would have been executed if President Richard Nixon didn't pardon him. Well, that was a blatant liberal lie. As stated by PolitiFact and verified, the article says that McCain and 33 other POWs faced a court-martial for their crimes. Richard Nixon issued a blanket pardon to all 34 POWs, including McCain. This part of the story seems to be entirely fabricated. There is no record of any legal proceedings against McCain. His name is also absent from a list of all the pardons granted by Nixon. This false story is just one of many that is unfortunately still widely believed. McCain did reveal the name of his ship and some information, but it was not considered anything of great military value that the North Vietnamese probably did not already know. What must be remembered is what McCain and others endured as prisoners. Those who did not endure the beatings, pain, torture, crippling injuries, and starvation are in no position to assess the conduct of the men who did. The only jury that matters is what McCain's fellow prisoners said, and they cleared him. Losing the general election to President Barack Obama, he remained in the United States Senate until his death in 2018. McCain had a very colorful political career where he gained a reputation as a maverick for his willingness to break from his party on certain issues, including LGBTQ rights, gun regulations, and campaign finance reform, where his stances were more moderate than those of the party's base. Commander and U.S. Senator John S. McCain III died on August 25, 2018 in Cornville, Arizona at age 81. In full disclosure, all of the men who I have mentioned in this video, I interviewed and knew, and I am of the personal opinion that the slander against John McCain, as well as slander against anyone due to their political beliefs, is totally and completely out of bounds, and there should be legal repercussions for those who do it. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.